Hello, everyone. This is your host, Elder Keith Brown. Today, our subject will be a cage of hateful birds. You know, the object of this lesson today is to talk about something that I think needs to be addressed here in the United States of America as well as the world. There is a lot of hate going on right now inside of our country, in our churches, and all throughout our neighborhoods. And I really feel the need that we need to talk about what is actually taking place within the world that we live in and why is there so much hate. We're going to go into the scriptures here and we're going to talk about what hate is, how hate started, and the root, I believe, what are the root causes of hate. So we call this lesson a cage of hateful birds. Let's start in the book of Revelation 18:2 with the King James Version. And the scripture says, "And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and is become a habitation of devils, and the whole of every foul spirit," and this is it right here, "and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird." Now, I truly believe that in order for us to understand the book of Revelation, we first need to understand what the book of Revelation is. I believe that the book of Revelation is what I call the book of the revealed. And if you understand history and you understand scriptures and the moves of God's Spirit, you can actually see God's hand being revealed in the book of Revelation through dreams, fasting, prayer, and of course, acknowledging it with scriptures. When I think about the cage, I think about a man-made product. A place where men create places of boundaries, where men create situations such as maybe the ghetto, maybe certain laws that are passed, and maybe certain philosophies that men have created. And I guess that's the root of what we want to talk about. We want to talk about what is in the cage. You know, we want to talk about some of the philosophies and some of what the Bible calls doctrines of devils. We're going to go into that in a minute. Certain doctrines that have been put in this cage where seducing spirits exist and where men are fed these particular doctrines. There's a reason why there's so much hate in the cage of the world that we live in. The cage of our homes, the cage, we know how the jail system is, but we're talking about cages and systems within doctrines that indoctrinate people to be hateful. We're going to look at some of these philosophies and we're going to do the best that we can to just stimulate your thirst to understand that Paul and the church were going through the exact same thing concerning philosophies and doctrines of men. Remember, men create cages. God gives freedom in his kingdom, but men create cages. Colossians 2:8 says, "Beware, lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ." So the word philosophy through Wikipedia is interpreted as philosophy is a study of general and fundamental questions about existence, knowledge, value, reason, mind, and language. So let's deal with those three words basically and not make a big deal out of this. And let's look at those three words: existence, knowledge, and values. In those days, in the ancient days, the existence of God worked through many gods, which they believed in polytheistic belief systems. They believed in many gods, many different types of deities that existed during the Roman time. Their knowledge was, they derived their knowledge from the elements of the earth, you know, the trees, the wind, the rivers, the sun, etc. Their value system was a place where everything was abstract and anything goes. Well, see, that's not how the true and living God worked in those days in time. God was a one God. He was a monotheistic God. And he believed that he was one and that we should not bow down to any gods that come before him. But in the systems of men, where the philosophies had existed during those days in time, they were all in those days programmed and encouraged to serve what Paul called the unknown God, but what I also call the abstract God, the God that is all over the place. This is why Jesus said, narrow was the way to eternal life, but broad was the way to destruction, you see. So here we go. In looking at the different philosophies, Paul here had a big task before him. And the task before him was that he had to teach the people of God during that particular day and time that they be careful that they not conform to the rudiments of the world, which was after the tradition of men and not after Christ. I'm a firm believer that in these days and time that a cage is being created and the philosophies of men are in the cages, and thereby they are creating a cage of hateful birds, a cage of hateful inhabitants. Let's go to the scriptures here for a minute. Let's go to Revelation 17:2, where it reads, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. Now, what do you do when you create a cage and you put a people in a condition? You put a people under laws and doctrines and abstract thinking, and you're not they're not leaning towards the God who made heaven and earth. And then you drunken the nation with laws that support men with men, women with women. You legalize marijuana. You put guns in other people's neighborhoods. This is a place of pure alcoholism. This is not good. What you see happening in America, I believe that it is a man-made demonic condition. And I believe that the cage of hateful birds that exists in this country and outside of this country, they are embracing ancient doctrines that have deceived the world from the beginning of time. And we have to understand and recognize these doctrines when we see them. The problem we're having here right now is that some of us have gone so far and have partaken in drinking the wine, and we're so drunk through propaganda and foolishness that we can't seem to see the game that is being played. All right, let's look at some of the doctrines that I believe that are in the cage that is causing a major upheaval here in the United States of America and possibly throughout the world. And there's so many doctrines and philosophies in the world, of course, we can't number and talk about every doctrine and belief system that exists in the world because we would be here for days on top of days. So I just picked out about 3 or 4 items I might just hit here and there. The first doctrine or philosophies of men that we want to talk about that I believe that is in the cage of hateful birds is humanism. So I looked up the word humanism, and it reads an outlook or system of thought attaching prime importance to human rather than divine supernatural matters. Now, when you take this concept of humanism and you attach it to human importance and you don't want to include supernatural matters into your decision making in the world, you become what we call a borderline atheist. And most humanist people who believe in humanism are polytheists, are polytheistic in nature. They believe in, as we stated, many different gods. They believe in abstract gods. They believe in many different philosophies. And sometimes even in that particular spirit, people fall into the spirits of tolerance. That's a big word nowadays. We all are encouraged and pushed to be tolerant and to be one and to accept everybody's different religion and belief system. But when you begin to study Christian history, you're going to find out that the Christians were basically persecuted not because they were tolerant, but because they were intolerant. The Christians during the ancient times did not believe in worshiping and bowing down to other gods. They didn't worship the gods of Rome. They didn't give homage to Athena. They didn't bow down to Zeus. They didn't bow down to Apollo. They did not bow down to the unknown God. And because of their stubbornness, their righteous stubbornness to be intolerant within a Roman system, the Romans and other citizens of Rome who had embraced these gods, they did not like the Christians. And in some cases, the Christians were labeled as criminals. To be called a Christian was to be called a criminal. And rumors were spread about the Christians in some cases that they were cultic in nature. They were drinking blood, and there was incest involved. When in actuality, the scriptures they were only following the scriptures and drinking the blood of Christ, which was wine, and of course they was breaking bread, and was misinterpreted as if they were cannibals. The other rumor that spread throughout this polytheistic generation during that time was that when they called each other brothers and sisters, the Romans took it to be a form of incest. So there was really a rough time for Christians during that day and time, but mostly they were persecuted because of their intolerance. Now, the spirit of humanism and self-worship has been around for a very long time, and it is still here. Okay? I would also like to note that we're now seeing traces of humanism being preached across the pulpit. And it's coming through what you call motivational speaking and doctrines. Now, if you note that when these preachers preach now, they very seldom do you hear them talk about scriptures. Very seldom do you hear them talk about the supernatural. As a matter of fact, some preachers have gone as far as allowing celebrities to come into their pulpit to speak about their particular overcoming experiences, etc., etc. And if you note, most of the things that these people who are invited in their pulpits, they talk about obtaining material things, obtaining things that pertain to worldly gain. There are elements of humanism within our pulpits, and we are witnessing fables being taught, parables being taught, and oftentimes some of the messages that the preachers are preaching now does not change the lifestyles of individuals who come to Christ. So we have people in the church who are even being indoctrinated just to be good humanistic Christians and respect everybody's belief system. Well, now we have a great infiltration. There's a great infiltration coming into the church, and the value system is becoming abstract. Why? Because we're promoting human behavior and not kingdom behavior. And when a church decides that they're no longer going to promote kingdom behavior, they're opening the doors for the elements of humanism to come into their churches and come into their messages. Another philosophy that I found that is in the cage is called the ancient Egyptian religion. And I just looked the word up again. I looked up all the words of these different philosophies so I would do them justice in the proper interpretation, to make sure that when people hear this, that you are clear on why I'm saying what I'm saying. And it reads, ancient Egyptian religion was a complex system of polytheistic beliefs and rituals that formed an integral part of Egyptian society. It centered on Egyptian interaction with many deities, believed to be present in and in control of the world. Rituals such as prayer, offerings were provided to the gods to gain their favor. Formal religious practice centered on the pharaohs, the rulers of Egypt, believed to be possessed a divine power by virtue of their position. They acted as intermediaries between the people and God and the gods, and were obligated to sustain the gods through rituals and offerings. Now, one of the reasons why I decided to put this philosophy in the cage of Hateful Birds, because I am an outreach person, and oftentimes I would run into people who embrace Afrocentrism. And in listening to the discussion sometime and talking with people who had embraced the Egyptian philosophies, they would oftentimes condemn Christianity, and they would condemn the Bible. And being that I am a child of the 60s and the 70s, I clearly remember that some of the people who were telling us to go back to Africa were also using that indoctrination as a Trojan horse to push us away from the teachings of the book of the Bible. Now, their argument was that it was a white man's book and that the white man used the Bible to control the slaves, which we all know that the white man did use the Bible to control the slaves. We've got that, and we're going to address that in the next unit. But we're here to say this. I believe through study that, again, the Egyptian system was a polytheistic system that believed in many gods. And from a biblical perspective, we see that this has been the struggle throughout the age of time, the one God and the many gods. This has been happening since the Old Testament time. And I believe that in order for you to understand the one and true and living God, you have to have experience with God. You have to experience what I believe is the second chapter of Acts. Now, let's go back to the slave master. If the slave master misused the Bible, if the slave master used the Bible to control the slave, and he took advantage of the slave, and he didn't get himself straight, the slave master is going to be on the wrong side of history in Judgment Day. This book has no respect to person. And I believe that you must experience the book. We can talk about Africa all day, and then we have to look at a lot of different things here. Telling us to go back to a place that didn't work forward back in those days, as those religions in Africa obviously were not strong enough. Some of those doctrines and some of those belief systems are being used to cage us and turn us as African Americans into hateful birds. We understand the sins that have been created by white society. We got that. We got the history. We understand that. But we've also got to come to the reality that this world that you're living in right now is going to pass away. The rudiments of this world is not rooted in God's will. And we are sorry that things happen. There's nothing we can do about the past at this point. But embracing doctrines of hate, doctrines of confusion, doctrines of non-trusting your brother, of not trusting your brother. These doctrines do not help us overcome the issues that are at hand right now. So my concern is that I refuse to believe in the abstract God. I refuse to believe or to accept the spirit of tolerance and to tolerate everybody's belief system, because I'm going to tell you, you can have a belief system, and that belief system might not even change your life. You can have a belief system and still go to jail and still kill and still do things that are contrary to God. We have to examine what we say we believe in. Now, I'm not saying that African history is bad. I'm not saying that I don't like history. But what I am saying is that there are certain doctrines that we have to put back under the microscope now. And we have to look at not history and not some of the crimes that were created in history, but we need to look at the lifestyle that is taking place right now as a result of the root of those histories that are now affecting us right now. We need to change from the inside out. What is happening right now in our communities is a shame before God. Things have to change, brothers and sisters. The next philosophy that I would like to throw in the cage is called white supremacy. White supremacy. So the word white supremacy, when I looked it up, it says white supremacy is the racist belief that white people are superior to people of other races and therefore should be dominant over them. White supremacy has roots in scientific racism. Wow. And I looked up the word scientific racism, and scientific racism had referred to Darwinism. And of course, we understand that Darwinism was the foundational belief of Adolf Hitler, where they began to, evaluate or to look at people of color or people who were not of the Aryan descent and to believe that they were the lesser species of the earth. Now, this doctrine here, white supremacy, which is also linked to slavery and hatred of people of color, is also in the cage. But it is a doctrine that has been around for a very long time. And these ancient spirits have always had hatred of enslaving other nations and downplaying and controlling other nations through force, or in some cases indoctrination, even as the slave was indoctrinated. But we can all see white supremacy taking place throughout the whole world. We see the hate that is being perpetrated upon people of color, immigrants, and things of that nature. And the question here is, the cage of hateful birds is getting stirred up in the cage, and they want out, or they want what they want. We are not to participate in any form of hate, racial hate, against any race. You see, because in that day, when Jesus comes back and we go up to heaven with him in the first resurrection, these issues that we have on this present earth is not going up in heaven. Your kids are not going to jump in the pool of living water. You know, there's not going to be any pirates up in heaven, trying to take the gold off the streets. This is not going to be a place where you're up there dancing with James Brown and Rick James and all of your football players that are going across the goal line. There's not going to be any football or baseball or basketball in heaven. There's not going to be any of this stuff in heaven, you know. But we have been indoctrinated to believe that this is how God thinks, and God is participating in the Super Bowl and all of this foolishness. You know, this deep indoctrination, even going back to white supremacy. Some whites actually believe that they are a superior nation, but they have been indoctrinated to believe that. And this indoctrination has been around for a very long time. But some white supremacists, and if you are a black that is possessing and holding on to hate, you are going to be up in that day, and you're going to be very surprised. The cage of hateful birds, if you want to stay in that cage, you're not going up to heaven. You're not going to make it. There's not going to be any hate in heaven. We might as well let our anger go, brothers and sisters. The next one, I'm going to fast forward here, is politics. I believe that politics is a good thing. I put politics in the cage because politics, in some cases, though we need politics, we understand that it's a place that helps us govern things, and it's the art of managing policy. We got that. But we also understand that politics is a two-edged sword, isn't it? I mean, it's getting so bad now that even if you choose not to vote, which is your constitutional right, politics is now becoming a religion for some people. people sometimes religiously dedicate themselves to the spirit of policy. And if you don't participate, and if you're not tolerant, if you become intolerant with the systems of politics, of politics, you become what they call an outcast, and you basically, if you don't participate, you have no voice. But the last time I checked, this was a free country, you see. So the Cage of Hateful Birds deals with many different doctrines and belief systems. And I want to go through the scriptures here for a minute, because we're getting ready to close out here in a minute. And we just want to stick with the scriptures as much as we can, because those of us who call ourselves Christians or who are trying to be Christians, we believe in the purity of the New Testament and the Old Testament. And we walk in the pathway that was meted out for us in the New Testament. That's what we do. And we understand that during those days, Christians were not allowed to participate in the Roman systems unless they would first participate in the gods that Rome believed in. And in that case, Romans weren't even allowed to, if you weren't a Roman citizen, you weren't even allowed to participate in the Roman politics. There were no Christians in the New Testament that partook in Roman politics. So let's get this clear here. There's a major shift and a major change that takes place. Were you saying, well, don't vote? No, I'm not saying, you do what you think you need to do. But as for me and my house, I'm going to make a decision to trust in the kingdom of God before I trust in the kingdom of men, and what we call, again, the rudiments of this world. But let me just say this, and I know some of you right now are kind of heated. I understand it. I got that. But I want you to hear something for a minute in 2 Timothy 4:3. And it says, "For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust they shall heap to themselves teachers having itching ears." I am not here today to itch ears. That's not my purpose. My purpose is not to, you got an itch in your ear and you just can't reach it. That's not my job. My job today here is to be a watchman on a tower and to say that here in the United States, something is wrong. Something has gone astray here. We are becoming a hateful cage of birds here in the United States of America. And if we don't stop what we're doing, there will be no democracy. If we don't stop our hate, this country is setting itself up for a visitation from the true and living God. I'm afraid for America. I'm afraid for the steps that America is taking and the direction that America is going in. There's so many different philosophies and doctrines and belief systems that we are constantly being bombarded with. Our children are no longer safe. Our children are now questioning their sexuality. Parents are at 40 and 50 years old are still acting like they're 22 years old. We're going too far, dear hearts. We're going too far. And the church is the power of the church is slowly deteriorating because we ourselves have become humanists. We've been indoctrinated by the doctrines of humanism, where we no longer believe in the supernatural power of God, but we believe in the theories and the belief systems and the will of man. So the question is this: will you come out the cage? Am I in the cage? Let me read this, and I'm going to close. And it's coming from 1 Timothy 4:1-2, and it reads, "Now the Spirit speaketh expressly, that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies in hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron, You do not want your conscience to be sealed. The more you walk away from God, the more your conscience becomes sealed. There is a great falling away that is taking place right now in our churches and in our pulpit. And the polytheistic spirit, ancient spirit, is in our pulpits, it's in our churches. The Trojan horse is loose now. I just received some information from my son where he had showed me a lecture that was done on TED Talks where a young lady was speaking about pedophilia and that pedophilia was a sexual preference. And the way she worded that lecture, she made it look like pedophilia was nothing but a preference, and it was nothing wrong with it. And the people gave her the dignitaries in the audience just clapped, and they were so proud of her because she spoke so eloquently that pedophilia was just a preference. Well, dear hearts, if you say that, if she is saying, if America is on the pathway to saying that pedophilia is a preference, then somebody has to be exploited for that preference to be satisfied. We're talking about children, dear hearts. We're talking about communities. And the question still remains, what does God think? And what is God getting ready to do? Because we're serving gods. We're serving abstract religions and belief systems and philosophies of men. And we all have strayed from the scriptures. Many shall depart from the faith and give heed to doctrines of devils. We do hope that we all come out the cage, and we hope that if I offended you, I'm sorry that I did that, but it's now time in these latter days, it's time now to preach sound doctrine. And it's time for our preachers to stop itching the ears of the inhabitants. We do hope that you learned something. I know I did, and I know this is a tough lesson, but we're living in tough times, dear hearts. We're living in tough times. And it's very important that we understand that something is wrong in America. Something is wrong in this place. Mass shootings, kids shooting schools up, drive-bys, children being shot in drive-bys, guns all over our community. Every time you turn your television on, it's sex, and now we have men on soap operas kissing men. There's something wrong, dear hearts. There's something wrong with the pathway that America is going on. We do hope that you have gathered something out of this lesson, and may God bless. Amen.